crime, high treason, and it's time we took a look at something a little bit older than we have been, because let's face it, Athlon's a bit new. There's one thing I like, it's hardware that has quirks, it wasn't particularly popular, or has some kind of unique attributes. I think the AMD K5 processors are a fine example of hardware in this category. I only own a single K5 system. It lives in the same model of case as the AM486, but this one actually came to me with a different motherboard inside that had a Pentium 75 in there. As a result, this one can be considered a totally new machine over what it was, and has no army background whatsoever. Of course, I'm not going to be satisfied with looking at the box, because that's really boring. You know what I'm like, I'm going to take that lid off and I'm going to put my hands in there. As with most machines, there's nothing too clever looking in here. One thing you might have latched onto is that almost every connector on this motherboard is white. This is an ECS TR5510 AIO v2.4. I've noticed that these white connectors are quite common on other P5 era ECS motherboards. I know I pulled this one from a machine some years ago, and I think it was made by Stern, which is common with local government institutions, usually educational establishments, although they do often favour RM for younger users. The arrangement of the components is quite standard for a 5th generation motherboard. 48MB of EDO RAM and next to the keyboard port where you'd expect them to be. 4 PCI slots are here and there's 3 ISA slots. Damn white ones. They remind me of that socket 940 motherboard I had that was all white, the racist. Sadly that was stolen and I can't remember the model number. They're not the weirdest ISA slots I've seen though. This system uses a ward bias, and I hate a ward bias. I wonder if there's a way to get AMI bias on here. This motherboard actually has a CPU fan connector on it. That socket 370 Celeron cooler is probably a little bit overkill for this processor, because under there is the grey topped AMD K5 processor. This is the 100MHz version, but I've got a gold topped one somewhere. I think that's 166MHz, but I'm not sure. The AMD K5 was available for socket 5 and socket 7 motherboards. If you don't know a lot about older computers, it might shock you to discover that these are the same sockets that the Intel Pentium processors were using. That's right, I can actually put a Pentium in here, and a Cyrix. This was quite common with old motherboards, and I think this one might be a bit old though for K6s, Centaurs and Rises before anybody asks about that, because that's the sort of question I'd be inclined to ask. We'll come back to the CPU a little bit later. Interestingly, this is one of the coolest running voltage regulators I've ever encountered on one of these boards, but it has one of the largest heat sinks too. It probably doesn't even need that. This is cash on a stick. It's often called cursed. I sure hope it's not going to end up toast. Although I'm sure later AMD systems could probably make toast if you tried. Basically, both this and the Pentium do not have L2 cache on board the CPU, so you can install, on this board at least, 256 or 512 kilobytes of L2 cache, though you need some tag RAM if you're using pipeline burst cache like I am. It needs to be low latency as well, so watch out for that. You can run with none at all as well, which is really useful if you need to slow the PC down for compatibility reasons. In fact, some deturbo buttons had the effect of disabling the cache. This motherboard claims to have support for such a button, though by this point many just toggled an LED and did absolutely nothing. I've never tested it, but I'll be doing that today. You can see where this motherboard might once have supported the older socket-based cache chips. This must have been in an earlier revision. It seems odd to me that they're wasting a lot of board space up there. You'd think that they've put something else in that spot. Expansion cards are a little boring here. There's an S3, one of the only original parts in this box. I have a label with the original specifications of the machine here. Not sure I should show you that, what with these catalogue numbers been on it, but as with the 486 it's just a run-of-the-mill card, and it gets the job done. How many times have you seen this Sound Blaster 16? I just use that as a placeholder until I can make my mind up what card I want to install. This machine might get an Aztec card, as I haven't got one in use right now, although I'm tempted to install a Yamaha 719. Linksys Ether 16 LAN card, it's over there, reminds me of my coax on network days. As this motherboard has PCI slots, it's likely to get another Ethernet card in there. So this Ether16 can go in a machine that only has an ISA bus. The hard drive's small and there's not much else to say about that. It's made by Fujitsu. That CD drive is also lying. It's a 52 speed drive I borrowed from a council office. Nobody seemed to care. In case you wondered about said CD drive, it's shit anyway, so the council can have it back if they want. See, I told you I was only borrowing it. What else? Why is the infrared connector here? It strikes me as odd. Looking at that header reminds me it's best not to fuck around with connectors like that on these boards. Most of them hadn't been standardised yet. I remember connecting a USB header according to the manual on a similar board. It let out some of its magic smoke that day and it ruined my scanner. If I start the machine there isn't much in the way of noise. It runs fairly quiet. This screen pops up for a second. I've never actually read it. It's a bit like RAID, but I doubt it is. It's probably just there to show off PCI IDE bus mastering. In short, the IDE controller can, within several limitations, initiate transfers of data instead of relying on the CPU as much as it otherwise would. It's probably because people behind IDE had realised that SCSI was quite a bit better. Oddly, there was a time when this motherboard had 4 PCI RAID cards installed. This was to recover files from my AMD Duron system. That's right, I actually used this thing as a file server with the AMD Duron's old hard drives. On the subject of the drive controller, it doesn't matter what drive I use, but problems like this nonsense keep happening at random, so I suspect the onboard IDE might be a little bit dodgy. The BIOS has nothing interesting to offer. It's standard, boring, not as good as AMI award BIOS. It can go away. No, I didn't mean it like that. Come back! Right, well, anyway, before it fucks up again, there's some stupid ASCII art I did. I wrote this the same day as Crisis Maximum Leet Edition in my old IBM video. There's an early Windows 95 version installed that has the progress bar going backwards on the logo screen. Whilst that might be a bad omen to some, I argue that it's because this thing's so fast it makes everything else look like it's going backwards. Stick that in your 39K and smoke it. What can I say about the OS? It's Windows 95. I like Windows 95. A lot. It has to be in my top 2. But we all know how it works by now. It seems to run hover, and I'm guessing therefore that the design for Windows 95 text on the CPU mustn't be lying. Here's PC check, and we've seen that before. It's a cool little utility though. I remember finding it on a floppy. It was when I was slave labour for a place called KCL and they had ordered me to format about 3 crates of floppy disks. Looking back, I should have stolen the Xenix disks that were there as well, but at least I didn't format them. I remember modifying my floppy drive with the old cardboard trick so that it ignored the write protect tab. I regretted doing that when I formatted my PowerPoint presentations and Excel spreadsheets out of existence, almost failing my NIAT and CLATE. I said CLATE, it has an A in it, you horny fool. At least I didn't call it NISA this time, because that's what I used to write on the forms. To make matters worse, the guy in charge of me was kind of associated with NISA. That just confused me even further. By the way, NISA is to do with ice skating, in case you didn't know. My head's hurting now anyway, there's too many abbreviations. Right, well, it's turbo time. This is the generic information screen we've all seen before. And if you've not seen it, it's rather simple. I don't think I need to read it out. Interestingly, the K5 shows up at almost 4 times its real speed. Now, the branch prediction unit is 4 times larger than the Pentium, and I can't help but wonder if this is somehow related to that invalid readout. I'm not sure the cache is right either, as I think these have 8 plus 16 kilobytes as opposed to 8 plus 8. It doesn't show up my external cache either, so I'm not sure I trust it. But for the hell of it, let's see if the cache or frequency change when I do this. Apparently they don't. Even the LED stays the same. Keyboard shortcut changes the LED though, but the turbo test in PC check fails. As it can't see the external cache, I'm not sure I trust it though. As a point of interest, a lot of this is guesswork, because I wrote the script before I even tested this stuff. Oh, you can download my scripts in the description from now on. Sometimes things get left out, so maybe they'll interest somebody. And screw PC check, I'm not happy, I want passmark. Unfortunately I can't run that on here, but I can use the benchmark in terminal velocity as a test. Doing this, it actually seems the turbo does make a difference. Look at the K5 with turbo versus without turbo. That's kind of weird. Unfortunately for the K5, it didn't hit shelves until around 1996, which is a little bit too late. It wasn't so widely adopted as a result, and is often forgotten about. Do you know anyone that had or has one of these things? It's actually significant for a few reasons though. Firstly, it's not technically an x86 processor. In fact, it's not even a CISC processor, which x86s usually are by definition. This is in fact a RISC processor with an encoder stuck to it. This adds another level of logic, which is a major contributor in the low clock speeds that the things actually attain during their lifespan. Secondly, it was AMD's first fully in-house processor. They designed it themselves. It was the first time they used the K numbering scheme. The K stands for kryptonite. This is presumably stating it is the only thing that can kill Superman. I wonder who Superman's supposed to be in all of this. Whilst performance is generally similar to the Pentium, and in some respects it actually keeps up with the Pentium Pro, it doesn't have an MMX instruction set, so you won't be playing pod on it, because that game's got an attitude problem about things like that, and games like Blood, which put high reliance on this subset of instructions, will suffer performance drops and lag spikes. Overall, I quite like the K5, it's a decent chip, and if you're sick of messing about with Pentiums but still want to mess with the 5th generation system, these might be the processors for you. I'd usually run some games and tech demos, but I think it's quite predictable what this thing's going to do. Well, it certainly seems that runs alright, doesn't it? Well, as you can see, it runs pretty much like any ordinary machine. But that's kind of what makes it a little bit less ordinary. It's that whole rebellious feeling of running something that isn't an Intel chip during the Pentium age. The K5 kicks ass. I like it. I like it a lot. But that's the thing. It might not have been old enough still. I think it is. But if it's not, then I plan on doing a video with my Atari. Downside is I might not actually be able to film things on the screen, like, I might not be able to record from the console like usual. I might have to point that camera at the screen of the console playing, so it's not going to look so good, and I probably won't use a script. But I'll burn that bridge when I come to it. It'll be discussed in that video, reasons and what's going on and why I'm doing it. How did I get here? Well, that's an issue for another time as well. I might not be as active for a little while. I've just had an operation on my back today, so if you want to see how horrible that looks, even though there's still dressings on, so it doesn't look that bad, but it does give you an idea of how much has been done, hang about after my little logo thing. Why you'd want to see that I've done it, but whatever. I'm High Treason, and I'll see you again soon. Well, this is just for reference sake. If you've only been out this long, I don't know what's wrong with you. There we go. I can't actually see what I'm doing, so this is all just guesswork. Not nice.